Welcome back to Man Across New Horizons. I'm dear darling. So shall we see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhollow today? And I know you all want me to address it, the big elephant in the room. The hot drama that everyone's been talking about, the gossip on the street, the tea which is snatching everyone's wigs. What is it? Clearly it's a Dungeons and Dragons team on Wizards of the Coast going, not crazy per se. I was going to say crazy, but that's a bit far, but all that controversy and drama around it. And you might be like, that wasn't what I was talking about. Well, just me, I was setting up for a bit basically, it'd be a bit of a fake out, where pretend there's this like elephant in the room, this drama I need to address, and then, I address something completely different, but I don't even know what drama's going on right now, to be honest, so I kind of probably fell flat. But anyway, good evening everyone. Right now in Fawnhollow, it's 8:05 PM on Friday, January 6th, 2023. Anyway, I'm not really going to address that drama in the first place, so if anything, this is kind of a clickbait in the end. So, it's come full circle, it wasn't clickbait, then it was clickbait, but no, it was clickbait, then it wasn't, then it was, then it wasn't, and now it definitely isn't. But, I'll tell you, just so you sort of know what's going on, because you might not frequent the Dungeons and Dragons community, and it's surprising how much I frequent it, despite the fact I don't even play Dungeons and Dragons anymore. But maybe sometime in the future I will. So okay, Phoebe, sure, why not? But basically, what's going on is like Wizards of the Coast was like, I don't know if they were like bought by Hasbro ages ago, and if you don't know, Hasbro is like this giant like entertainment conglomerate is probably what I'd say. They basically control so many things in like sort of entertainment sphere of like toys and games. But there's basically something where they basically change their open license agreement. I think I legitimately accidentally hit spacebar. I actually just stopped recording there, but basically, Wizards of the Coast changed our open license agreement somewhat, where now it's like they can change the agreement at like at a moment's notice, well, not quite a moment's notice, like a 1 month notice or whatever. Then also stuff like I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I read a bit of it, but I didn't read the entire thing. I can't put in storage while I have company. It doesn't make any sense. I can't even open my own cupboard while you're here, Phoebe. But it's like they change their things so that something like they had to register any now third party made property, I suppose, from Dungeons and Dragons with like Wizards of the Coast now. It's something strange like that. I don't know, you can look up details exactly yourself or whatever, which basically people are quite upset about, because the whole point of Dungeons and Dragons, I suppose, is the fact that it's basically sort of like a theatre of your own imagination, right, that you're playing with in the first place. It's not like something that you particularly need a license agreement with, but people like to do it because there's like a unspoken agreement. But everyone knows that if you play Dungeons and Dragons, if you're in that community, people know what you're talking about in the first place. So that's kind of why I assume, I'm saying this as, I'm not quite an outsider, but I am still kind of basically on the sidelines looking in. It's been rather interesting to see it unfold, because imagination games are very much something which is just sort of born out of not innate sense of being, but it's quite sort of natural from human beings in the first place, isn't it? I mean, I'd imagine there's certainly people, you might argue you've met some of these people that don't have imaginations, but I certainly haven't. Everyone I've met has been able to think of things, so I think that's sort of just like one of the only steps required for sentience or sapiens. I don't really know the difference between those two words, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm saying all of this from the outside. I'm not very well versed on the subject of like what's going on with Wizards of the Coast, what's going on with Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of thing, but Dungeons and Dragons is very much a personification of a sort of thing, that definitely appeals to me. It's just using your imagination. It's playing these imaginary games, I suppose, where you make up your own stories. Now, if you've been watching my videos for any amount of time, you'd be like, yes, that's absolutely something which, can you believe it, Phoebe? Which, dear darling, would definitely feel appealed to. Also, just for that, Phoebe, you had to go. Yeah, get out of it, Phoebe. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But it's basically they're sort of trying to monetize, I suppose, their success of Dungeons and Dragons, which has really sort of like peaked in the past couple of years, I suppose. Which I don't necessarily blame them as a business for doing, but it's sort of just like a narrow your eyes sort of way, being like, I wonder if it's going to pan out exactly how you expect it to. But either way, it doesn't really matter. Well, I'm not gonna say it doesn't really matter. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, either way, I'm still on the outside, so it's more like I don't really have much of a horse in this race in the first place. That was a good rap line. But yeah, it's just like all these imagination games. It sort of like takes me back, here we go into the dear darling anecdotes. But when we were younger, when you play these like imaginary games on like the playground and that sort of thing, and all these things which went along. went along with it. And I remember that there's actually 2 games which distinctly stick. Well, not 2 of them actually, but there's been multiple sort of like make-believe games. Make-believe is probably the better word for it, because they're all these sort of make-believe games you play as a child or whatever, and you know, just having it in this form of like Dungeons and Dragons is sort of more like giving a more rigorous ruling to it. Not necessarily that it needs a rigorous ruling, but basically it's making sort of like a language which everyone can speak, I suppose, and everyone's on the same page about, and having it established as a rule set means that everyone sort of needs to like inherently agree to it, so you can actually subscribe to these rules and everyone can have a good time. Because, you know, I mean, you probably remember it when you were a child and you're playing make-believe, and you know, imagine you're playing like some sort of like battle and make-believe thing where you're like, oh, you know, I attack you with my sword or whatever, and then you always have, you know, someone going like, no, you don't do any damage to me because I had a shield or something. Like they make up their rules on the fly, you know, having an established system sort of circumvents that. Because when you're a child, it doesn't, not going to say it doesn't really matter, but say I'm sure it matters to you when you are a child, but it's sort of just like people, you know, kids aren't exactly the smartest at, you know, improvising made up rules and that sort of thing, while adults sort of like try and be a bit more sneaky about it, for better or for worse, I would say. Well, probably mainly for worse in that regard, but yeah, but by having an established rule set, it allows everyone to sort of communicate with a familiar language, and, you know, allows, you know, some of the onus to no longer be put onto the person who's actually in charge, I suppose, of the imagination games in the first place, like you have when you're a child. But it's interesting that, I suppose, without this whole, like, you know, drama about it, I suppose, in the first place, is that the monetization of it in the first place, because that's not really something very monetizable, isn't it? It's wild that Dungeons & Dragons can even have such success, as I suppose, in the first place, because if you think about it, you don't really need any of like the material, you know, to play Dungeons & Dragons. If you want to play Dungeons & Dragons right now, you can literally just play right now. You could just make up your own rules or whatever, and that's kind of, it's not playing Dungeons & Dragons, but you're playing something similar to it, isn't it? You are doing that sort of fancy, like, imaginary roleplay, right, in the first place. So it's interesting, like, how that even comes into be from like a business perspective, I would say. But I don't know, you know, I suppose that's probably what was troubling with the higher ups in Hasbro, who were just like, how can we squeeze money out of this? I don't really know, to be honest. Well, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, you got to remember that not everything out there, but, you know, businesses are businesses. They're still trying to make money, aren't they? So, you know, it's sort of like I'm not going to say it's inevitability, but it's sort of like it's expected. But yeah, it's weird trying to imagine, like, trying to make your make-believe into like a real sort of structured system when the entire sort of core principle of it relies on the flexibility and the imagination and the whateverness, I suppose, of the rules, you know, the hand-waviness. And it very much brings me back to primary school days where we used to play these sort of make-believe games. Like, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but one of them I do remember was one of them was like, I don't remember what it's called. I think it might have been called like Zookeeper, where someone was like, not a zookeeper, but someone who was basically someone who looked after a load of pets, and everyone else just pretended to be animals. And then you had to like know what every animal were, what each person was as an animal, and you had to give them like pets and then like treats and whatever have you. I don't really remember when we played them on Climbing Frame. I don't know. I don't really, you know, it's a thing with these make-believe games when you have as a child, is you're sort of like, you know, from an adult perspective, you're like, what's the aim? Like, how do you win? And the answer is you don't. You just have fun. You just sort of like let loose and go wild or whatever. Anyway, I remember that game because I tended to be the zookeeper quite often, I think. But I don't really remember what I did most of the time, but I do remember this other time with this other girl. She was a zookeeper once, and I remember I was a badger or something. I mean, I asked her for like food, you know, and like animalese or something. I genuinely can't really remember, and she gave me something, and I was like, no, you had to give me insects, like badgers eat insects, or something like that. I like omnivores, I don't know, probably something we just like recently learned in like biology class, or we don't have biology class, science class or something. That's the only thing I remember. Anyway, she ended up not being the zookeeper all that often. I imagine she didn't like it. Maybe it's because my insistent establishment of being like, oh, you know, you got to feed me right food as a badger. Who knows? But yeah, I don't know why that sticks in my mind necessarily, but there's also this other one where it's like a battle game, you know, where I don't even understand it, because if you think, I mean, it's probably something you probably participated in when you were younger. You're like, oh, you know, it's like a war in the playground or something, you know, everyone makes believes like, oh, everyone's got guns and shields and like weapons or whatever have you, and are there any sides? What are we fighting for? No one knows. We're just sort of here to have fun. But I do remember that thing, because I remember, the days of playing with healer in video games start young, apparently, because I remember I was like, I don't want to like shoot people or attack people with swords, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give people shields which protects them from one attack or something. So I remember that, like, we set up on like our climbing frame. Our climbing frame was like in 2 parts. We had like the main like structure of a climbing frame. It wasn't that big, mind you. It was like, I would guess it was about 12 meters tall or something. No, 12 feet tall. Maybe like 3 meters or something tall or something. It was basically, it goes upwards, and that's about it. Oh, hello, Vivian. You trying to take a ride or Captain? Sorry, you got beaten to the punch. But yeah, like one team was set up based in like the main climbing bit frame where you actually like go up, and then we had like another section which was basically like an obstacle course-esque sort of like low ropes section is kind of what I'd describe it as, and the other team was set up on the outside. And I remember just sitting on the low rope section being like, this is our home base, And people would run back being like, I'm injured. I'm like, okay, I'll heal you up now, you're in base, and I'll give you the shield which protects you from the next attack. And we'd run out, and then like one of the people would be like, I shot you in the head or something, and we'd be like, no, dear darling gave me a shield, and they'd be like, oh no. I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but that's something which happened. And I also remember, amount of cheating, of course, which goes on. Some kids are very honest from a young age. Props to them. One of my best friends at the time he's very honest. Anytime he would get here, he'd be like, he called himself out. There's very good virtues. What's he like now? I have no idea. I've literally never spoken to him since I left primary school. But there's this other kid as well who always like cheated. I'm going to be honest. Every time someone would be like, I got you or something, he'd be like, no, whatever. Except for this one time, where we actually spoke to him about it, which is, quite adult of us, I suppose, as children. And then he actually, listened. And then the next time someone was like, I got you. And he was like, no, he was about to go, no, you didn't. And then he remembered the conversation. And then he played dead. He was like, or whatever. I don't know why that memory lives in my mind. It literally has no impact on my life, I would say, whatsoever. And also, it's not really an entertaining story. Like, I feel like if people looking from the outside, looking at like the Dear Darling YouTube channel, will be like, whoa, she's done like 1,000 something videos. She must have so many interesting stories to tell. And then here I am telling these like boring stories which no one cares about. But I still remember for literally no apparent reason. Anyway, so that's the sort of make-believe stories we have. I remember back in nursery we had a lot of make-believe as well, because we had 2 parts in the thing. We had, for one, we had like a huge amount of like construction set items, and by construction set items I mean basically we had safety vests, and then like a load of like wooden planks and wooden blocks, which mostly the boys would use to like pretend to do construction or something, or make things. I don't really remember. And then we had this like sectioned off, this other section where it was like all the girls would come and play pretend, and they played like like family or something, which is quite, I suppose, stereotypical in a sense. But how much of that is due to our own accord, or how much of that is due to influence by media time or general culture, I suppose, at that time. I don't really know, but that's what I remember happening. And I remember one time it was like swapped, where the teacher was like, you should give like the other side a try, and then like all the girls were like, oh, you had to play for these wooden blocks, and like these giant, by the way, these blocks were like giant wooden blocks, by the way, like the wooden planks were like 1.5 meters big from what I recall, and the blocks were at least like 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 10 centimeters. They were huge. But it's not Lego blocks, I'm telling you. But anyway, I remember it swapped, and all the boys went to the kitchen, and they like played play pretend or whatever, and they played house or whatever, and the girls would play with the construction blocks. Anyway, that was a wild time. Nursery, wow. And nursery being the British equivalent of kindergarten, just to let you know. I always do these American translations. I shouldn't. not that I'm saying I shouldn't, but I'm like, what about all the other countries? Well, the short answer is I don't know what it is in all the other countries, to be honest. So who knows? And analytically, most of my viewers are American. So that's just how the cookie crumbles. That's just how life works out. That's just how life finds a way. It's just the circle of life. But yeah. So these make-believe games, it's interesting to even like conceptually try and monetize them, because I feel like intrinsically, you're probably sitting there, and me sitting there as well. It's just like, you can't. How do you? You can't monetize. You can't businessify something which is I'm obsessed with art books. Sure, why not? It's just sort of thing where like, you can't, because like it's sort of like inherent to everyone. It's sort of like, oh, you're trying to monetize this? Well, I'm just going to imagine my own thing anyways, aren't I? Like, there's not really much you can do about it in the first place. I still need to see how long this first part is, which I accidentally closed. Don't listen to me. 1 minute 42. Okay, just so I know how long I need to go on for this part. Oh, I'm gonna have to edit these videos together. What a nuisance. You know, this is where instead of waiting for it, we get DaVinci Resolve open. That's my free to use video editing software, because I'm gonna go have a shower afterwards. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of late. Get the video software open. Get all these pre-made videos out of here. Cosmic Express art time lapse, that's old. Get this out of here. New project. Animal Crossing New Horizons. What day are we on? 1018. Oh my god. And get it ready instead, because I basically said my piece about make believe. I can't remember any other sort of make believe. Anyway, no, actually, the thing I led on to is about battle minigame. I remember talking to a friend about it, being like, I feel like it eventually evolved into us being like it combined with an animal game. So we were like battling animals or something, but we were only like Arctic and Antarctic, like polar regions sort of based animals, or not even polar regions, but like cold region based animals for whatever reason. Because I remember one of my friends, she was like a hawk, she was like a scouting messenger, she would like dive bomb into like the enemy territory and like scout people out or whatever and come back. And then I was like an Arctic wolf. I don't remember why I remember this at all. Who apparently still gave people shields. How does this work? I don't know. It's very sort of like warrior cat-esque in a sense, but you know what I mean. Another friend was polar bear who would just like charge into battle. I don't know. I don't know why I remember it in the slightest, but it's coming back to me ever so slightly. Oh, Celeste was there yesterday, wasn't she? I forgot. Oh well. And anyway, I remember talking to a friend about it at the time, being like, oh, we should make this into a video game when we're older, when we can make video games and that sort of thing, and it'd be really cool. And I was imagining like MMORPGs, because for whatever reason I played them back in that age. Maybe I was a bit young to be playing them, but I don't. Or maybe I was a bit young to be playing any game, but I still played them anyway. Age restrictions be damned. And it was, I don't know, that just sort of comes to mind. Obviously, that's never come to pass. I've not made a video game outside of the sort of boundaries of something like Scratch, which, but it's also this like really random JavaScript minigame I made back in secondary school one time for like an enrichment day thing, which I should definitely talk about one day, because I still sort of remember it, and it sucked. It's probably the long and short of that story. But I mean, nowadays I probably could learn to actually program a video game if I wanted to. But the question is, one, do I have an idea? I actually, I have been thinking about this idea for a video game for ages, but it's never going to come to light until I actually sort of sit down and try and do it in the first place. But I don't know, programming it's like kind of my thing, but it's not like super my thing, I suppose. Like enough that I would learn about it, but not enough that I'm going to make it myself, like my hobbies, I suppose, if you get me, my spare time hobbies. But I think it would be cool to at least sort of experience it once, like making a video game. Yeah. I don't know, maybe that'll happen in the future. Imagine that. Dear Darling series. New series. Dear Darling makes a video game. But making video games is pretty hard, so I'm not really gonna sort of like don't put your eggs in that basket, I would say. What else do I have? Like, what other make believe games do we have? I don't really remember, to be honest. But those are the main ones I remember playing back in primary school. A lot of other times we just sort of play like general sort of playground games rather than like a make-believe one specifically. Which, yeah, I don't know, house was quite a common one, wasn't it? You pretend to be a family or whatnot. Oh man, I just have this really random memory, which I'm not sure if it would ever slot into any other future episode, but it was the thing where we had to do like, actually maybe it will slot into a future episode. And if it does, then you're going to have to wait till like episode 1634 when I actually talk about it. But too long and didn't listen. And part of it was just we had to like read out this poem about like this mother trying to make a pie and trying to get people to help, and then no one will help her. And then it's just like, oh, she asked everyone for help and everyone's like, nah. And then she bakes a pie at the end, and then she doesn't give anyone the pie because no one helped her. Or maybe she does in the end. I can't really remember what moral is. Anyway, we had to have a narrator, and I didn't want to be a narrator, despite the fact I usually was a narrator for these sort of things. We split up into groups of 3, and I remember the group I split up into, like, one of the character roles you had to play was a cat, and I remember I was like, yeah, I'm going to be this cat, or whatever. And I don't even know how a cat necessarily helps with baking a pie, but anyway, that happened, and then I remember the person who was our narrator, had, like, I remember, we basically had a narrator, and they basically were so stressed by it that they started, like crying in the class, which is obviously quite, sad that a kid would be stressed over that in the first place, Not as sad as like, oh, that's sad sort of way, but like oh, it's okay, don't worry, buddy, sort of thing. So we got a new narrator, and then they started crying, about it, later on in a few minutes. So then I ended up being the narrator anyway. That's a long and short about story. And I remember this story because I was very upset that I could not just be the cat for once. I had to be the narrator role, or for whatever reason. Anyway, I mean, nowadays I would very much be a narrator role. That's very much my sort of like dealio. But I don't know. I just had to fit that anecdote in somewhere. But anyway, make-believe stories. I guess that's what I'll call this episode. So for now, if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, description, shares are greatly appreciated. Join me Dear Darling Discord. Follow me on Twitter down below. Hope we can see each other again. But for now, it's all farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now. Imagination.